You are in for a mighty treat. My guest today is a member of the Basketball Hall of Fame class of 2018. That means that in 6 weeks, his face will be above you in the Ring of Honor. He is a 5-time NBA and ABA All-Star, an ABA Rookie of the Year, an NBA champion with the Boston Celtics, the first African-American scholarship athlete at the University of North Carolina. He is a Rucker Park legend and a valedictorian of his high school class. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Mr. Charles Scott. It's a pleasure, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome to Springfield, Mr. Scott.
Thank you. It's a great honor to be here.
I'm so excited. What I neglected to tell everyone is that they get a chance to even ask you questions in a little while. So if there's something you've ever wanted to ask Hall of Famer Charlie Scott, you will get that opportunity as well. Mr. Scott, as we sit here today, the question that I normally close with is asking people to put this moment into perspective, sitting underneath all of the Hall of Famers. But for you today, it seems like I should start there because in 6.5 weeks, as I had mentioned to the audience, this building changes forever, as it does every year when the new class is enshrined. And so I'm wondering for you today, of all of the incredible accomplishments of your life and the many still to come, how can you describe this moment today sitting where we are in Springfield at the Hall of Fame?
Well, the best way to me to describe sitting here is sitting there. Because when I was your age, I sat out in a place called Rucker Park and I watched people like Wilt Chamberlain and Connie Hawkins and them play. And I just hoped one day I would get an opportunity to be in a position to play like them, to be in a position to be an athlete that people would want to come see, watch play. Basketball to me was an outlet of enjoyment. It was a chance to me to make a family of my teammates. And this here, the Hall of Fame, brings me a new family, and it brings me a family of excellence, and it brings me a family of people who perfected their sport. And not only that, people who have given to their sport and has made it the type of sport that you, the audience, love to watch. And I'm just glad to be a part of it, and I'm just glad to have the opportunity to be a part of this great Hall of Fame.
Now, you mentioned the family of excellence, and as I alluded to in your introduction, your excellence really exists in many different worlds. As a scholar, you're a valedictorian of your high school class. As a basketballer, you're a Hall of Famer, but you're also a Rucker Park legend. So as a Stuyvesant High guy, as a New York City guy, I'm wondering what that was like with your feet in both worlds, both excelling in the classroom and excelling at Rucker Park. Those two bullet points don't exist on many people's resumes at the same time. Was that just all about you having the discipline to know that it's school time, it's basketball time, or do they mix really well in your head?
Well, to be honest with you, I had a lot of help. If I had my choice, I would have just played basketball.
Yeah.
But I had teachers that saw in me the potential to be a great student. And really, for teachers, I would say, I know how, of course, my daughter is a principal. I know how going to school, and sometimes it can be so frustrating with what you have to deal with children. Well, I was a student that a teacher took an interest in, and when she first took an interest in me, all I wanted to do was make 70s and 75s and just pass the class. But she wouldn't let me play basketball unless I made 95s. So she saw the potential in me, and she asked me to reach my potential in academics as I wanted to reach my potential in athletics. And that challenge was the thing that really kept me going. I mean, the challenge of trying to be, I wanted to be a great basketball player, but the same attitude and the same competitiveness and the same desire to be the best basketball player I could have been, I wanted to be the best student I could be.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us don't look at it this way, but academics are the same competitive spirit that you have in athletics. The same way you compete on a basketball court or on a baseball court or in tennis or in football, it's the same competitiveness I took into the classroom. I mean, I never forget one day in class in algebra, I handed my paper in early because I always wanted to have my paper in there early. I wanted to get a mark real quick to see what my grade was. I was a person of no patience. So the teacher, algebra teacher, marked my paper, and as I handed it in, I saw I made a tiny mistake, but he wouldn't let me take it back. And I made a 96 on the test. And then the young lady who was going for salutatory and handed her paper in, and he gave it back to her and told her she made a mistake, and I got mad and walked out the class because I just felt like he was giving her a competitive edge. But luckily, when he wanted to report me to the principal was the basketball coach. So he was able to explain to him my competitive edge and that I was just being a competitor and that I walked out because he gave her a second chance to get a higher grade than me.
So in the academic competitiveness realm, and I love that you put it that way, you play your home games in New York City, Stuyvesant High. Well, you play a pretty big road game for your senior year of high school as you relocate to North Carolina to finish up high school. It was during that year that your recruitment with Coach Dean Smith at the University of North Carolina really hits high gear. So I'm wondering what you can tell us about your recruitment, and we'll talk about how much of a pioneer, how much of a pioneering moment this was. But I'm wondering if you could just talk about how much of a shift of life that was to go from New York City to the southern piece of North Carolina, right on that South Carolina border. What was that like for 18, 19-year-old Charles Scott at the time?
Well, first of all, I was a 17, 16-year-old. Secondly, I only went to Stuyvesant for 2 years. Thirdly, I went to Lombard for 2 years, and I graduated from Lombard. First of all, Stuyvesant High School, which is a very good academic high school. But, I hate to say this in this environment, but to understand, I went to Stuyvesant High School, which when I went there in the 60s was about 95% white and 3% black. And even though I was an AAU basketball player, the coach at Stuyvesant High School would not allow me to play on the basketball team because I was black, and the team was 1-27. So the reason I left the school is because if I could not play on a team that was 1-27, I felt like I had to go someplace else if I was planning on getting a basketball scholarship.
Yes, sir.
So you don't have to go down to the South to find racism or bigotry sometime. Unfortunately, that individual was that way. Not the school itself, but the individual that was the basketball coach, and I understand that. The school itself was an excellent school.
Right.
Going down to North Carolina from New York City is a big change. First of all, anyone who's from New York City know that we New Yorkers are smarter than everybody else in the world. So going down south to New York, from New York City, to me was, I had to go down south and give them an education of New York City smartness.
Yes, sir.
So, it was a turn of events for me because coming from New York City and going to the South and really experiencing what segregation is like on the open circumstance is an eye-opener. And the one thing I will tell people today is that, especially in the society that we live in today, we should learn to understand that we all are different and that none of us are the same. I was very fortunate that I was telling people, one of my favorite people of all time is a young man named Dave Cowens. And Dave Cowens is as different from me as night and day. He's from Kentucky, the backwoods of Kentucky, and I'm from New York City. But our love of basketball gave me a friend that I've had for 50 years.
Right.
And even though he is white and I am black, I consider him my brother. And this is what sports have done for us. I wish that everybody who's standing in here today could look around and really realize that no matter how different we are alike. And that there's more that we are bonded together that keep us alike than that makes us separate. So back to what I dealt with in the South, hopefully has changed.
Yeah.
I hope that I had something to do with that change. And the way I do is that I never forget, while I was going to school in the South, a little young white boy came up to me and said, "Charlie Scott, I want to grow up to be just like you." So when a white young man in the South can say he wants to grow up to be just like a black young man in the South, then you know progress has been made in a great amount.
Well, I know I'm not. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, I know I'm just me, but I can tell you that in my life, your story has meant a lot for the development of my family. So I thank you for all of the work that you have done to close those gaps, and I sincerely mean that.
Thank you very much. But you know, I get a lot of credit for doing this, but you know, they always said it takes a village to you know, to help someone. Well, I really had a whole state, and I had the state of New York behind me, and all the people that I grew up with, I have to thank them, and really the people at the University of North Carolina, and Dean Smith, and Larry Brown, and John Lotz, and there are a lot of people that make my success story a success.
Right. And
they deserve as much credit for it as I get.
Charlie, what can you tell us about a young Dean Smith? Because your interactions with Coach Smith in the mid-1960s during his recruitment, both of you fully aware what your enrollment as a scholarship athlete, as the first African-American scholarship athlete at the University of North Carolina, you were both well aware of what that was going to represent. And so you get there, and the success follows, right? Two-time All-American, three-time All-ACC, 2 Final Four appearances, and your basketball story immediately takes off. But what can you tell us about Dean Smith as a coach in those days that you wish more people knew?
Well, I'm going to tell you a little story that really signifies Coach Smith. My sophomore year, we had Thanksgiving dinner, and after Thanksgiving dinner, I went over to Durham, which is about 8 miles from Chapel Hill, and I stayed over a friend's house, and we had practice the next day, and I got to practice, and I was about 2 minutes late. So when you're late to practice with Coach Smith, you have to go run the steps in Carmichael Auditorium, and he put you on a 25-pound vest and 8-pound shoes, and you run up and down the steps in Carmichael Auditorium. So I put the vest on, and I'm running for about 5 or 10 minutes, then I'm running for about 15 or 20 minutes, then at about 25 minutes, I'm tired as I can be, and I'm still running. And finally, I go down the steps, and I go to Coach Smith, and I said, "Coach, can I stop running now?" And he said, I forgot you were running. And I said to Coach, "You didn't notice the only black guy on your team wasn't on the court at the time." And Coach Smith never noticed color. All he knew was that number 33 was not on the court, but he never noticed, he never missed me on the court. And I said, "How could you not miss the only black person on your team on the court?" And that tells you how Coach Smith never saw color in that. And to be honest with you, he never talked to me about color. The thing that I tell people about Coach Smith, and it's a statement I make, is that Coach Smith, when he married his wife, she never knew that she would have 300 children because everybody that Coach Smith coached, he treated them like they were his child after they left school.
Yeah.
And everyone always wants to talk about Coach Smith and the basketball players that played for him. There's about 20 of us that made it to the NBA that became players. But he had 300 other players that never played basketball, that went on to do great things in life, that, to be honest, he probably was more proud of what they accomplished than what we accomplished. And I think that as a coach, your job is not to make me a basketball player, it's to make me a better person. And I think that Coach Smith did the best job he had that anyone could possibly have done.
Now, after North Carolina, at that time, it was a beautiful time to be a professional basketball player insofar as there were two incredible leagues, one emerging and one that had been steady Eddie for a while, of course, the ABA and the NBA. You're drafted by the Boston Celtics, but instead opt to play with the Virginia Squires in the ABA, as so many players in your era with your skill set opted to do. The product was more exciting. It was a more fun league. So what can you tell us about those years seasoning yourself? We all know how it ends with the NBA championships and the great career in the NBA. What can you tell us about those ABA years that helped Charles Scott become the player that would eventually win the NBA title?
Well, to be honest with you, and players, we all have egos. By being the first African-American player in North Carolina and being successful at it, sometimes you become overconfident about what you're able to accomplish in life. And to be honest with you, I thought that I could go to the ABA, and when I went to the ABA, that the NBA would automatically merge because Charlie Scott came to the ABA.
Really?
Then I found out I wasn't that goddamn important to them because it never happened that way. So to be honest with you, and to be perfectly honest with you, I went to the ABA with the idea that I would be going to the NBA real soon.
Yeah.
And I went to the ABA thinking I would be playing with Rick Barry and Larry Brown, two Hall of Fame coaches and players. And as soon as I got there, they left. So, that was the experience that I didn't expect.
They didn't want to mess with you. They were out of there.
Not that they didn't want to mess with me. They didn't want to go to Virginia. But to be honest, the ABA the ABA is what the NBA is today.
Yeah.
It's exciting. It was more of a small man's game. Uh-huh. When I was growing up, the game was about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell and all the big guys. Now the game is about Steph Curry and James Harden and LeBron James and all the little guys. And that's what the ABA was about when I was coming. It was about the little players. And I was fortunate enough to play and to play with another great ball player. I mean, people don't know this, but I played with Julius Erving in the ABA, and everybody don't know this, but I was the leading scorer. But I helped Julius a whole lot because all the shots I missed, he was the leading rebounder.
Yeah.
So we had a great combination. I missed the shots and he rebounded them.
Yeah.
It was great to play with him, and it was great to see Julius Erving when he was just beginning to play, and to play against guys like Dan Issou and Louis Dampier and guys who would come to the NBA and make their mark there also. So, I mean, the ABA was fun, but the NBA was more of a challenge.
Mr. Scott, I only have 3 questions left for Mr. Scott, after which you will get a chance to ask questions of a Hall of Famer. So here's your homework right now. If you have a question that you've been thinking about, after this next question that I ask, I'm going to ask my friends, the Hoop Hall staff, to come through and select a few of you that'll have your hands raised. We'll put you in a line over to our left, your right, and you will have that opportunity. So I have that. You've been served warning. You have 3 questions left, and I'll ask for volunteers after this one. A couple years later, you make the move to the NBA, playing for the Phoenix Suns. So you've already sort of answered why that transition happened, but I'm wondering, what the basketball felt like. Was the difference, was at that point, was there still the big chasm in style between the NBA and the ABA, or had enough of the guys, had enough of the style started to merge?
Well, really, no. The style was very different because, again, I mean, when I came to the NBA, you still had the big fellow up there on the court, and Wilt was still playing. In fact, I never forget the first time I played against Wilt Chamberlain. I drove to the basket, and I laid the ball up, and the crowd roared, and I felt so good. And the next time I drove to the basket, Wilt Chamberlain knocked me on the ground, and I got up like I really wanted to fight until a friend of mine walked over to me and said, "You really don't want to do that." and I looked at Wilt Chamberlain and realized I really didn't want to do that. So as I walked by him, I mean, I wanted to act like I was brave, so I tapped him on the butt and said, "That's all right, big fella, I know you didn't mean to foul me." But playing in the NBA, I mean, it was so different because the style of play. I mean, and of course you had great players, you had greater players. I mean, I got the chance to play against Oscar Robertson and Jerry West and Walt Frazier. Just great ball players, and it was a style that really forced me to play the best I could every day. And that's what the NBA really is about, is that every day you go out there, if you don't play your best, someone will be there to outplay you.
Would you like to ask a question of Mr. Charles Scott? Raise your hand right now. You will be recognized. A handful of you will be recognized by the great Hoop Hall staff. I love it. I love it. Look at everyone so excited.
Yeah, you.
I love this.
Yeah.
So after a handful, here, come on over there. Good job.
On.
After a handful, if you want to go over there, but we'll put you in line.
Here you go.
Do you want to ask a question? We're stepping outside of the format for a minute. We got one question coming in hot from the left. Go ahead, bud.
Why'd you decide to be a basketball player?
Why did you decide to be a basketball player?
Why did I decide to be a basketball player? Well, I'm going to be honest with you. When I was growing up, I didn't think I was too good looking. But what I noticed was that when I went to the basketball court, girls watched guys play basketball. I mean, they didn't watch us play baseball or, football, but girls came out to watch guys play basketball. And I was a little older than you, so I was interested in girls. So that's how I first started playing basketball. But then once I got into it, it became like a family thing. You know how you and your friends go around all the time making mischief? Well, we don't make mischief, we play basketball. So that's what really got me interested in basketball.
Thanks, buddy.
Okay?
That's a great question.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. What's your name?
Tucker.
Tucker. Hi, Charles.
Hi, Charles.
Glad to meet you. Okay.
Mr. Scott, in '76, you get your NBA championship. And that team, that roster, Silas, JoJo White, Charles Scott, John Havlicek, Dave Cowens, coached by Tom Heinsohn, Don Nelson. I can't forget Don Nelson. What's the one thing that stands out to you? I mean, that's a 6-game series against your former team, the Phoenix Suns. What's the one thing that stands out to you about that title?
Okay. All the little kids close their ears. I'm going to tell you the one thing that stood out to me about that title.
I love this story already.
It was that the game was being played in Boston, Massachusetts at 9 o'clock in the evening. And you do not give Irish people a time to go to the bar before you play a basketball game. Because by the time they were ready to start the basketball game, there was 3 fights going on the court before we could start playing basketball. So that's the first thing that stood out in my mind, that we couldn't get to the layup line because there was fights going on the court. The second thing that was on my mind was that I had fouled out of 4 straight basketball games in the championship. And I didn't want to set the record and foul out of 5 straight. So I was trying not to do that, but unfortunately, I hold that record, for fouling out of more championship games. And most of these people here, none of y'all from Phoenix, so I can say this. As a Boston Celtic, we never thought we were going to lose to them. So we never thought we were going to lose a 4-game series to them. So we were never worried about losing 4 games. We just knew that we had to play how we had to play. In fact, for any of y'all who want trivia questions answered, this year the Golden State Warriors added a kid named DeMarcus Cousins to their team. And they say that this year that Golden State Warriors will have 5 players that were previously on the All-Star team starting next year on their team. Well, the last team to do that was my Celtic team, which was 40 years ago, which was me, Paul Silas, John Havlicek, JoJo White, and Dave Collins, where all 5 of us made the All-Star team the year before, and the next year we were all All-Stars.
Gosh.
We played together for a championship.
Well, Mr. Scott, I could do this for, I know we got to get to the important stuff over here, but I just want to mention things that we haven't talked about that I wish we could. Your gold medal in the 1968 Mexico City Games. What an incredible accomplishment in the face of one of the most explosive summers in our nation's history. And that is hard to believe that was 50 years ago. Your business accomplishments as a leader for Champion merchandise. I own more Champion pieces of Champion clothing from my childhood, Champion jerseys than I could possibly. I mean, so from Olympics to the boardroom and basketball in between, is there anything that you wish people would ask you more about?
Oh, I mean, really, my life has been an open book because of the things that I dealt with. So, I mean, people have really questioned me about a lot of things. Is there anything I wish people would ask me more about? Not really.
Yeah, you do plenty answering questions.
I mean, people ask me a lot, and you ask me a lot, so I mean, not much been left out. But I'm pretty sure that they will find questions that I would never have thought of asking. So I would like to let them answer.
Ladies and gentlemen, Charles Scott. Hey, bud, come stand right over here. I only have 2 requests. 1, you allow me to hold the microphone, and 2, you introduce yourself to Mr. Scott.
I'm Grady.
What's your question?
How did it feel like to hold up the trophy in 1976?
How did it feel like holding a trophy in 1976? Grady, do you have a girlfriend?
No.
Get a girlfriend and hold her, then you know how it feels to hold a trophy in 1976. Okay, buddy?
That's a great answer. Thanks, bud. I told you these are the...
Seriously, don't worry about it. Look at you smiling. You got one in mind, though, don't you? Okay.
Hey, how are you? Here, go right ahead. Look right at Mr. Scott and introduce yourself.
I'm Emmeline.
Hi, Caroline.
Emmeline.
Pameline, I'm sorry. What is your question? Okay. You're cute.
How long have you been playing for NBA basketball?
How long have I been playing NBA basketball? I played it since I was 11 years old. I've been playing basketball, and I'm a certain age now, which is a lot older than I like to say, but I've been playing basketball for a long time. But if you want me to wait for you to grow up to marry me, I mean, I'll wait a little while.
That was the best reply ever. Thank you, Emmeline.
Okay. Bye, Emmeline.
Hey, bud, come on in.
I'm Joseph.
Hey, Joe.
Who was your biggest role model when you were a kid? Who was your biggest role model when you were a kid?
Who was my biggest role model when I was a kid? My biggest role model when I was a kid was Oscar Robertson. I mean, in fact, I used to try to look like him. I never put on the weight like him. But if you ask Fran, I even argue a lot like him. I try to be so much like him that he likes to argue, that I argue like him. I mean, but Oscar Robertson, to me, was the quintessential perfect basketball player. I mean, he played the game. He was a very efficient basketball player, and he was a great basketball player. Have you ever seen Oscar Robertson play?
No.
Who's your favorite basketball player?
Jason Tatum.
Jason Tatum? Okay, take Jason Tatum and make him 10 times better, and that's what Oscar Robertson was like. Okay? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. You have some homework. YouTube, the Big O.
I'm Sam Evans, and I'm a future NBA MVP, just letting you know.
MVP, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
And who's the toughest player you've ever played against in your career?
Who was the toughest player I ever played against in my career?
Yeah.
Well, you know, I mean, to be really honest, and I think that sometimes people do this too much, there was a lot of tough players. The player that I probably had the most problem playing against was a guy named Earl Monroe, because Earl Monroe played basketball like music. So I mean, and he was so, he did things so majestically that, I mean, I found myself really watching him more than trying to play against him. He was a great basketball player. And he was probably the toughest guy I ever played against. But I hope you well in being the MVP. What position you play?
Power forward and center.
Oh, you're going to be another Charles Barkley?
Yeah.
Okay, that's great then. Good luck for you. All
Thanks,
right.
buddy.
Okay.
You got to like the swagger, introducing himself to a Hall of Famer as a future MVP. One last question. Here we go. How are you, sir?
It's a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.
My name is Bruce, and I remember following your career growing up at UNC, Phoenix, and the Virginia Squires. At one time, I was a New York Net season ticket holder, and I'd like to ask you, what was your craziest moment in what was one time a crazy league, the ABA?
The ABA?
Yeah.
My greatest moment in the ABA? Yeah, I mean, since you're a New York Nets fan, I'm going to say my greatest moment in the ABA was when we played the Nets in the playoffs, and I scored 44 points to beat them when they had Rick Barry in them. So that was my greatest moment.
Great league.
Did it make you feel bad enough?
No,
a Net fan?
No. I just always enjoyed that style of play. As you referenced, it's like the game today. It was more of an open style rather than the old NBA, which was more of a physical, beat your brains in style.
Well, I
I'm
think,
glad
and I
the
think
game
now
has
you
changed.
see the excitement in guys like James Harden and all of them.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's more of a viewing league rather than a boxing match league.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with you.
Thank you very much.
Good. My pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, one last round of applause for class of 2018's Charles Scott.
Okay. All right. Thank you. It's really wonderful, Mr. Scott. Okay. Thank you.